Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judi Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guests for today. Welcome, mentors, to our second podcast. Today we have with us Dr. Sharon Saline, an expert around the country and around the world on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Welcome, Dr. Saline.
Thank you, Judi. I'm so happy to be here. It's great to see you. Everyone is listening, but I have the privilege of seeing Judi's smiling face.
Thank you very much. Before we get into our conversation that we're going to have, I want to tell our guests a little bit about you and what you've been doing, because I'm very excited to be able to speak with you. Dr. Saline is a licensed clinical psychologist with a practice here in Northampton, Massachusetts. She's a national and international expert in working with children with ADHD, and very uniquely, which I want to talk about later, their parents as well. Her focus is on how learning disabilities and mental health issues affect the student and the family. Dr. Saline is an internationally sought after lecturer, workshop facilitator, clinical educator, trainer. She is an author of the book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School. And I really am excited to be able to speak with you about this, because I did read the book and I have to tell you what I've been doing, and I'm very excited. There are many other noteworthy accomplishments that Dr. Saline has gone on to do, and I don't have time to mention them all. One is she has written articles for Psychology Today. If you want to know more about her, you can go to her website at drsharonsaline.com. She is also on Facebook, and she is on LinkedIn, and we will talk more about how you can reach her before we finish the podcast. We will also have links to Dr. Saline on our website at justeducationfirst.com, so you'll be able to go there and read about her bio as well. One of the things that came to mind as I was reading about you, Dr. Saline, and reading your book, as a psychologist, how did you end up focusing yourself on ADHD in particular, with so many different things out there you could have worked on? How did you end up doing ADHD?
Well, that's a great question, Judi. I actually started as a family therapist, and I worked with kids and teens and their parents. And I also consulted at schools in the classroom, helping teachers with students who were challenging. And I became more and more drawn to kids who were wired differently. And as this was happening, my brother had a child, and he ultimately was diagnosed with ADHD. And then my brother received a diagnosis, which explained a lot of things about my childhood. And I just felt that I could be helpful to these kids. I understood them because I had grown up with it. I myself didn't have it, but I think having grown up in a family with a sibling who did gave me a very, unique, a very special perspective. And I find them funny and creative and irreverent and challenging and just generally terrific. And so I that's because I have that perspective, which is maybe different than a lot of other people's perspective. I'm a good fit for working with kids with ADHD. And now I work with college students also, and then I also work with adults.
I love your description because I was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and I'd love to think of myself in those terms. That would be great. In your book, which we're going to get into more specifically, you spend a lot of time talking about the physical brain and the connection of its composition to ADHD. And I think it's very interesting because I'm not sure that kids who are diagnosed with ADHD actually think of it as a physical difference, like I wear glasses or someone wears hearing aids, that their brain, works a little differently than someone else because of some physical attributes. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. ADHD is a biologically based condition related to the neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine. And I sit in my office and I actually do a little scientific explanation with kids because the brain is an electrical system that runs on chemical reactions. And what happens is that you have a neuron and these neurons send messages to each other through these electrical impulses. And in our brains, a message goes through the neuron, it gets to the end of the neuron, and then there's something called a synapse, which is like a river. And in order to get from one neuron to the other, the message has to cross the river. And neurotransmitters are the ferries that help with that passage.
Great analogy.
So when you have ADHD, either you don't have enough ferries in the systems of the brain that have to do with dopamine, which is usually reward and pleasure, or norepinephrine, which has to do with alertness and attention. And so that you either don't have enough ferries, or the ferries that you have are operating too slowly. And so the messages are not are not making that transition from one neuron to another. And that really helps kids change the conversation from something is wrong with me, I'm a bad person, to my brain operates differently. And since ADHD has an extremely high heredity rate, basically if I meet a child or you see a child with ADHD, there's a 50% chance that child's biological parents have ADHD. Then we all have a conversation about having different kinds of brains. And I really try to take away the pathology and tell kids, I have an anxious brain. My parents have anxious brains. I inherited it naturally, and you probably inherited this. And it's not the end of the world in any way. It just means your brain works a little differently, and we've got to figure out how to understand those differences so you can be the best you can be.
I'm glad you brought up an anxious brain, because I was going to ask you about some terms that you use in your book, which, by the way, I have also used: attention wandering brain or fast brain. And a couple of kids they just laughed when I said that. I mean, they literally giggled when I said that.
Right. So one of my goals when I work with kids with ADHD, or one of the goals that I'd like to help parents do, is that when we talk with kids and we use the word disorder, we all alienate them from what they're experiencing. So we want to help kids come up with a term for how their brain works that makes sense to them. And so, obviously older kids who are already using the term ADHD, we will discuss it, ADHD. But generally, I'll ask them, what kind of brain do you think you have? Does your brain drift around? Is it a dreamy brain? Is it a foggy brain? Is it a a brain that moves. It's a jumpy brain, a moving brain. Someone says, yeah, I'm a mover. I have a moving brain. I was like, okay, great. So that helps them take this term, which is quite alienating, and bring it closer to them so they can have some pride and a sense of humor about it.
One of my students, his mother is diabetic, and I said to him, and you could tell me whether this was an accurate analogy or not, but I said, your mom is diabetic and she's taking medication for the diabetes, and it's helping her. It doesn't mean she's not smart or that she can't do everything that everybody else can do, that she isn't able to function in the house and be responsible. I said, but she has a physically different ability to process sugar in her body. I said, if your brain was a little different and medication would help it function better. This is a teenager, and he flatly refused to take any medication. I said, why wouldn't you try it and see if it would help? Would you think that was a good analogy?
Well, sure, but part of the reason that teenagers don't want to take medication often is they, don't want to be different than their peers, and B, they are afraid of how the medication will change them. Right. And the tack that I take is, how much are you suffering? How much are you suffering? How are you able to be the person that you are? And if the answer is no, or I'm not, no, I can't be that person, or I'm not happy, then I'd say, then we live in an age where we have options. And if you couldn't see, you would wear glasses. And the thing about medication is it's like glasses. You put them on when you want to see. And if you want to have a day where you don't want to take your medication, you don't take your medication. i.e., if I want to have pictures taken and I don't want to have my glasses on, I'll take my glasses off. Okay. So I think for me, I work with them on giving something a chance. And particularly if they're drinking and smoking pot, I'd say, you're altering your brain in all these other ways that actually aren't helping the challenges that you have. So let's just try and see, because if you can feel a little more productive, if you can actually apply what you know and perform in a way that you'll feel good about, that might be a change that's worth living with.
I like that. In chapter 1 of your book, I've kind of gone backwards here because I wanted to get to the brain part, but in chapter 1, you talk about your 5 C's, and I do want to spend some time on those because I really like them. You talk about the 5 C's in working with kids who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and you talk about self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. And I want you to spend some time taking each one of those and explaining what they are. But before you do that, I want you to explain, why did you list them in that order?
Okay. Well, ADHD is a condition in which people have difficulty regulating themselves. That's really the fundamental issue with ADHD. And so what happens a lot in families is that the child is dysregulated, and then the parent is dysregulated and is angry at the child for whatever behaviors they're exhibiting because they're out of control. And then you have 2 out of control people.
Okay. Yeah, that happens. It's happened to me.
Right. And one of the things that kids told me is that they have a very difficult time managing themselves when their parents have lost it. And so really nothing can be accomplished until people are in a centered, calm place. So that's why self-control is the number one.
That's really the foundation, you're saying.
So it's the foundation. You have to be able to manage yourself in order to manage your family or others or any kind of situation.
Okay.
And you're not going to be able to teach your child or help your child get back to a better place if you yourself are, erupting.
Okay. Okay.
And that was something that kids said over and over again, that they really want their parents to manage themselves before they deal with them. That it's distressing.
And the next thing you list is compassion, and that is before collaboration. So I'm wondering again.
We'll go down the line.
Yes.
So compassion is next, because what kids said is that they want adults to understand them and accept them for who they are and meet them where they are, even if they don't understand themselves. And I think sometimes what happens for parents of kids with ADHD, and I actually just did a workshop yesterday for educators, is they hit compassion fatigue. They're tired. They're tired of doing the same thing over and over, not necessarily seeing a result. They feel bad about themselves as parents, that they continue to struggle and their child continues to struggle. And so we need to have compassion for others, but we also need to have compassion for ourselves. You're doing the best you can with the tools that you have available to you, and so is your son or daughter. So we have to start there.
I love that, compassion fatigue. I just wrote that down so I would remember it. That's
okay. Writing things down is very good. It's an excellent way to improve your working memory.
Thank you. So now talk about collaboration, because I have some questions on that. I'm wondering, you also talk about respect in your book, and I'm wondering if respect is part of collaboration. You don't mention that as one of the C's, but I'm wondering where it would fit.
That's because it begins with an R. Collaboration is based on mutual respect. So one of the things that I heard from kids with ADHD over and over again is, I want to be included in the plans and decisions that you're making that affect me and are about me. Because these kids spend a lot of time hearing in school or with other people about things that they could be doing differently or better based on that other person's impressions and experience. And they don't often take into account what might work for that what that individual thinks might work for them. So for example, if you are at a school and you need a loose leaf notebook, you're said that you have to put your subjects in a loose leaf notebook, and you do better with individual notebooks, like little pads where you can write things that have a folder in the back, so that you can separate your subjects by color. But your teacher says you need a loose leaf notebook. You have a problem, right? Because you're being told that you have to do this thing that is actually counterintuitive to how your brain works. And so I think it's really important for us to sit down and try to help kids in ways that they think might be useful. It's not the only thing that we're going to do, because sometimes kids will say, I don't know. And in those cases, they need to have forced choices. Would you like A or B? Right? You give them some options, but you include them in the process so that they have buy-in. Because any kid with ADHD, any kid at all, isn't going to buy into something that they don't feel like, that they don't think matters. And for kids with ADHD, that's particularly important because they spend a lot of time having to do things they don't like to do.
I like the buy-in part. I say that to teachers when I do workshops all the time. If your boss came to you, and and said, I was sitting in the room and I want you to do this, 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 and this when next time you do a lesson on math, and and I want you to come to me and show it to me that, you've got it all planned out. How would you feel? And of course, they wouldn't be happy that someone was telling them what they needed to do in their classroom. They would want some collaboration on that process.
Exactly.
And that's what I try and, explain to them, that when they point to a child and they start barking things at them, that it's not received very well.
No, it's not. But it wouldn't be received very well if someone was doing it to you as an adult. I think a lot of times, though, people, you as an adult have a lot of life experience about things that work and things that don't work. And of course, you want to share that. But kids with ADHD need options, and I think all kids as they get older benefit from having options. When you're 2, you don't necessarily need options, but when you're school age and you want to have a choice, that's how you develop your autonomy as a human being and how you start to feel independent.
So talk to me a little bit about consistency.
Consistency means doing what you say you're going to do as much as possible, not perfection. Kids with ADHD are not asking their parents for perfection because they themselves know how hard that is.
Right.
What they're saying is, do what you say you're going to do as much as you can. And if you're not going to do what you say you are going to do, then please tell me why. If you're making an exception to the rule, explain why you're making an exception to the rule. So I think that's really important. The other part of consistency is about efforting, helping kids with ADHD make consistent efforts. And that means setting up tasks for them that are the size that they can actually start on or accomplish. And it means paying attention to the efforts they're making more than just the outcome. So it's focusing on the process of doing rather than the product.
That's interesting. And when you say consistency, I'm curious. I think I know the answer, but I want to ask you. When you say consistency, does it mean does it mean doing the same thing the same way all the time and just labeling doing it differently an exception? Or can there be consistency in evaluating something and choosing to do it totally differently as well if it's not working?
Well, that's actually one question.
Okay.
Because it means doing something the same way most of the time for a while, because routines foster persistence, and we want to teach kids with ADHD persistence. However, in that process, there have to be, and I really think this is important part of any family life, once a week family meeting where you talk about and evaluate something that you're doing or some plan that you have and how it's working. And if it's not working, then you'll make changes. So that answer to your questions are, it's kind of yes and yes.
Okay. I like that. And talk to me about the celebration part of it. You kind of addressed it a little bit when you talked about effort and so forth, but I'm just curious how you would explain it.
Well, noticing effort and process is a part of celebration, but celebration is also a point. It is a philosophy. It's a mindset, and that is because, and it's a positive mindset. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson found that the ideal positivity to negativity ratio should be 3-to-1. And I've been on my book tour now since August and talking to lots of parents, and I take an informal survey and I say, well, what do you think the ratio of positive to negative comments is in your child's life? And it's amazing. It's consistently 1 to 15. 1 positive for every 15 negative.
Oh my gosh.
And teachers have said that as well. And so this is very sad. This is extremely sad, because how can you build a positive sense of self-esteem? How do you build a resilience if the messages that you're getting are predominantly negative? And so celebration is noticing when your kids do something that you've asked them to do, giving positive feedback when they accomplish something, whether it's big or small. A high five when you clear your plate from the table that I asked you to. A hug when they come home and you find out that the teacher called to say they had a beautiful day at school, in elementary school, taking them out for burritos because they came, and ice cream because they came home with a really good progress report. Actually celebrating their efforts, because the negative thinking and conversations that go on in the heads of kids with ADHD are constant and pretty enormous.
Are there any? Go ahead.
We just want to counteract that.
Yes, it's important to do that because we hear so much of what we're doing wrong. We need to hear about what we're doing right as well. And sometimes we forget about that.
Exactly.
Are there any signs that you feel parents should be aware of when their children are 3, 4, 5 years old that might alert them to the possibility that their children might have ADHD, and that might explain some of the frustrations they're having or the difficult behaviors they're having?
I think preschool diagnosis is an area that is not fully explored. I mean, people have written about it and people do talk about it, but in general, and some parents know. Some parents have a child who act as if there's a motor always going. And it tends to be more parents of boys who are, incredibly active. They're just busy. They're aggressive often. They can't sleep. I mean, they're just very active. But they're different. They're outliers from the rest of their peers in preschool. But usually, ADHD assessment starts more. I see it more once kids have started school and they've been through a year or two, by second or third grade, and they're not kind of settling in. They're continuing to struggle with managing themselves. I worked with a boy, and he was in first grade. And he was diagnosed in first grade, and he had ADHD, and his father also had ADHD, so he recognized it. And he just was, as they say, bouncing off the walls in kindergarten. And when he got to first grade, it continued, and he could not settle to do some of the, basic academic work that was being presented, but they were also seeing these behaviors at home. And so, in order to get a diagnosis of ADHD, you have to have 6 out of 9 symptoms and display them in 2 areas of functioning. And for kids, that's school and home. And for adults, that's usually work and home.
Okay. So we've kind of set the stage for ADHD, and we've defined some of the terms in your 5 C's. You go on throughout the book to talk about some ways to work with or to redirect kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD. And I wonder if you could address some of them. I have them listed. I don't know how many of them we'll be able to get through, but what is your feeling about punishment, for example, and on the other side of that, rewards? And how do you define a punishment and a reward?
Well, that's a very good question. I do not think punishments work with kids with ADHD, because kids with ADHD have multiple serious executive functioning deficits. And punishments do not teach any skills. And punishments basically reprimand a child and take things away, which doesn't teach a child how to do things differently. It just makes them feel bad about what they've already done. So what works better for kids with ADHD, and I would say for actually most kids today, when I grew up, we grew up in a culture of intimidation. Our parents may have hit us or sent us to our room, but there were threats, and these just don't work. That's not how people parent today. What works is basically having kids earn things that matter to them. And that is often screen time, but it can also be time with you. Someone said to me, well, if they earn time with me for doing something, when they don't do something, does that mean they don't earn time with me? And I say, no, that's not how it works. The way you set it up is, you do this thing, and we will, we'll play cards, or we'll do a puzzle, or we'll watch a show together. But if you don't do this thing, then you and I will be cleaning out your closet. So either way, you and I are going to spend time together. It's just that one of them will be pleasurable and fun, and one will be tedious and probably unpleasant.
Unpleasant, yes.
So your behavior will determine that choice. And so it's important to link things kids want with things you want them to do. And if kids don't do what you ask, then they don't earn that privilege. So what happens a lot of times in families is, particularly, let's start with technology. A child cannot get off the computer. This is a common theme that I hear. I can't get my child off the computer. So we set up a plan with the child. We'll talk. I'll say to the parents, without the child present, how much screen time do you want your child to have? And they'll say an hour a day. This is for elementary school kids, an hour a day. And I said, okay, so 30 minutes a day is their automatic given. They get that no matter what. The other 30 minutes they have to earn. So if they get on the computer for their 30 minutes and they get off with, a warning and an agreement, and the alarm goes off and they get off, then they can earn the extra 30 minutes. And they can earn that 30 minutes on a different screen. But if the time comes for them to get off and they don't cooperate, then they don't earn that extra 30 minutes, and they still need to get off. So you're dealing in the currency that matters to the kids.
It's also, I would assume, empowering them in a way, because you're not telling them what they have to do, but there are choices. It may be a positive choice and a negative choice, but they do have the power to make a choice there.
That's right. And that's why we're teaching them about independence and autonomy, because kids like to have choices. Kindergartners like to have choices. Seniors in high school like to have choices. College students like to have choices. Kids like choices.
So would you apply that process to some of the conflicts that I hear parents say to me all the time? I do a workshop on the homework dilemma, the homework monster, the homework conflict. And it's a constant battle with parents. So would you apply that with parents and children?
Sure, absolutely.
Give me an example of how you would do that.
Well, for homework, one of the problems with homework is that parents don't help their kids set up effective work periods. So kids with ADHD, most of them can really work for about, depending on their age. In kindergarten, it's like 10 or 20 minutes. Middle school, it's 20 to 40 minutes. High school, it's anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour before they need a break. So when you set up a homework plan, you chunk it. So you're going to work for 20 minutes. The timer's going to go off. You're going to get a new timer for a 5-minute break. And we're going to decide in advance what you can do during that break. You can go to the bathroom. You can play with the cat. You can do jumping jacks. You can check you can check your social media accounts. And then when that timer goes off, you go back to your next period of homework. And then at the end of that period of homework, you repeat, you get another break. Of course, for elementary school kids, they may be done at that point, but high school kids may need another one. When you finish that homework period is when you get the big kahuna. You get the big reward. And so at that time, they can earn something that matters to them. They can earn time with you, reading a book, doing a puzzle, coloring. They could earn time with you watching TV. They can earn time without you and just earn extra screen time. So that's, you have to set up a system for them where where they have breaks and then they earn a reward at the end.
So you physically use a timer, you're suggesting?
Oh yeah, the time timers are really great because they show the passage of time rather than, analog time is what helps kids with ADHD. Electronic time is minute numbers that doesn't mean anything. So you want to use a timer. And really what I recommend for parents is what I call family work time. We all adults have way too much to do, and our kids have stuff to do. So make a work time where you're sitting down doing your work and they're doing their work. And this is great for 2 reasons. A, if they have a question, you're there to answer it. But B, if they're fooling around, you're there to gently guide them back to the task at hand. That way, your presence helps them stay on track without you coming down to remind them. And this is beneficial. And it's also a phone-free time. So, if you have to answer a phone call or then you say, I have to take a phone call, I'll be back. And then you do that. But in general, it would be great to have a time that's where you are actually doing something parallel to when your kids are doing something.
So if to go back to the 5 C's, the self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. If someone listening, if a mentor listening, either a parent or a teacher, wants to implement this in some way, what is the best way to begin this process to change the dynamics of what's going on in your house and start something new? How would you recommend that they do that?
Other than read my book?
Well, reading your book we're going to keep coming back to that, obviously. I loved your book. It was awesome. That's why I keep coming back to those. But, what would be the beginning? I mean, okay, I want to have more self-control when I get upset. I want to be more compassionate about the struggles that my children.
Really, I mean, it's a process, Judith. And I think actually, I was sort of being only partially facetious when I said read my book. I mean, the way to do self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration is by reading my book and listening to what kids say, following the examples I give you and the steps to make that happen.
One of the things that I loved about your book, among other things, what I loved all the editorial comments by the kids. And I have a couple of parents that are reading the book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I buy it and I give it to them. And I don't make it a requirement for the kids to read it, but I do suggest strongly that the parents read the first 2 chapters so that we can talk about them after that. They're on their own. I've had one parent hasn't finished with it yet, but one parent was very appreciative and very excited about all the information that's in there. And the question she asked me was the question that I asked you. How do I get started with this?
Right. So the way that you begin this process is you spend some time, thinking and talking, if you have a partner, with your partner about, what are the issues where things get out of control in our house? in our family? What are the times when everybody unravels? And so you make a list of those times. And then you go to your son or daughter and sit down and ask them the same question. When do you notice that we're really going at it and problems are erupting? And you make a list of what they say. And I'm going to bet that there's overlap between those two lists. And so together, you and your child decide, okay, what do you think is the biggest problem we have? Of these times when we're arguing. It's the morning, getting to school, it's doing homework, it's going to bed, it's cleaning your room. Let's pick one. And so you pick one of those things and you get started on those. And the way you do that is you follow the steps of collaboration towards making a plan with incentives, which I outline in my book, and also on my website. There are lots of articles and tips for how to get started and do this. And then as you are practicing the plan that you've created, you work through the 5 C's. You practice self-control when you see that your child isn't following through, or says something provocative. You make an effort to meet them where they are, not where you think they should be, to understand that they're doing the best they can with the resources they have available to them, which is why sometimes they can't always do the job that you'd like them to. You renegotiate the plan in a collaborative way when it's not working. You pay attention and you guide them towards, following through on process, and you yourself make the same effort. And then you notice when things are going well. You name it and acknowledge it.
And celebrate it.
And celebrate it. Exactly.
So where does the rule of 3 come in?
So the rule of 3 is a way for parents to give instructions. And the rule of 3 means that, sorry, I got distracted. The rule of 3, the rule of 3 is a method by which parents can give instructions and communicate with kids. And what a lot of times parents say to me is, oh, my child doesn't listen. I tell them something, they don't do it, they don't follow through. And that's because they're talking they're in the kitchen and their child's in the living room and they're shouting an instruction. So if you want to actually give instructions to kids with ADHD that they can really follow, you have to do the rule of 3. And the rule of 3 is this. You make eye contact. You say, your eyes on my eyes. You state what your request is, and you ask them to repeat it back. So that way you know that they've heard it and they've processed it. And this tends to help kids with ADHD hold on to the request or the instruction better than if you tell them from across the room. They need that content. Sometimes even putting a hand on their shoulder can help. It just makes contact with them.
I always try and pick out a quote or a perspective that my guest has said or done that I'm particularly fond of. And there are 2 that you have 2 of them actually. We'll see if we have time to get to both of them. But the first one was on page 133 of your book, and it says, knowing that one of the most important things for kids with ADHD is knowing themselves as learners and having both the confidence to ask for help and the willingness to receive it are the greatest tools you can nourish in your child. I thought that was very profound, and I'd like you to explain a little bit on how a parent can implement that.
It's a great question, Judi, excuse me.
Judi.
The way that we can help our children learn who they are as learners is to pay attention to what they do well and they're naturally drawn to, and feed it, enhance it, help it grow. This gives them the confidence to take risks, and to pursue what they're passionate about. By the same token, we have to help kids be able to label, acknowledge, and own their challenges without judgment so that they can advocate for themselves. So I had a client, and she had on her IEP, she had ADHD and dyslexia and an auditory processing problem, and she was not supposed to take spelling tests. And she was in a supportive classroom, and she started the new year. I think she was in 8th grade, and her English teacher gave her a spelling test. And she came to my office a few weeks later, and she said, I'm not doing very well because I'm failing in my spelling tests in English. And I said, why are you taking spelling tests in English? It's on your IEP. You're not supposed to. And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, why don't you tell your English teacher that it's on your IEP that you're not supposed to take spelling tests? So she said, do I have to? I said, well, you can ask your mom if she'll do it, but generally it would work better if you did. So the next week she came back and she said, well, my mom said she wouldn't do it, that I needed to do it for myself. So I told my English teacher when she handed out the spelling test on Friday that I wasn't supposed to take them because it said that in my IEP. And she said, well, everyone in my class takes spelling tests. And I said, okay, we're moving to the next level. So when you go to school tomorrow, you're going to tell your support, the person who was her advocate for her supported learning classroom that she had 1 period a day, that this is going on because it's not supposed to. And sure enough, she told her learning specialist, I guess is a more succinct way of saying it, the learning specialist. And learning specialist called a meeting immediately in guidance, and her parents came in, and she came and she went, and they talked about it. And of course, there were no more spelling tests. But that was because she didn't know her IEP, but she knew she was failing, and she didn't like that. And she had to learn how to speak up for herself, which she did. And so that's what I'm talking about.
That's quite amazing for someone so young to be able to
she was
that.
she was pretty angry. Anger can be a great motivator.
In your book on page 143 in your book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, is a quote that you have taken from Dr. Edward Hadawell. And I don't want to betray my age here, but I remember reading him and his research quite a long time ago. And for some reason, I don't remember this. And it's such a different perspective on ADHD, which we often view as being so negative, with so many negative aspects. You probably remember it, but you say, for example, he describes distractibility as turbocharged curiosity, creativity as impulsivity gone right, and energy as an alternative to hyperactivity. I loved that so much. I'd almost like to make a sign and put it up in a classroom somewhere, because these are attributes that kids can be proud of.
Exactly. And, I know we're going to stop soon.
Yes.
But we want to help kids be proud of who they are, and how we label things makes a huge difference. And so that's why I work with kids to, come up with a name for their brain that is something that feels consistent with how they experience themselves, and how we have to help them, channel their energy and their enthusiasm and their dreamy qualities into something that's more positive.
I want to thank you so much. You've given me so much information. I know all the mentors listening, teachers, parents, lawyers, doctors, whoever is listening. I know we'll get so many ideas from this. I want to share with our mentors. I believe, you can tell me if this is correct, that you will be speaking on March 3rd from 4 to 5:30 at the Northampton Area Pediatrics in Northampton, and on May 5th from 4 to 5:30, again at the Northampton Area Pediatrics in Northampton. So
yes,
if anyone would like
it's a free parent talk. The one in March is on parenting kids with ADHD, and the one in May is about managing technology in families.
That's awesome.
But there are other, I would like to say that if you go to my website, drsharonceline.com, there are lots of resources for parents and educators, videos, articles, things you can download. And I also have a YouTube channel where you can subscribe and get my videos and kind of learn from me.
Oh, great. I didn't know that.
Learn from me directly. Please follow me on Twitter or like my Facebook page, sign up for my blog on my website, and stay connected. Thank you so much, Judi.
Thank you so very much. I so appreciate your time.
It was great being here.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and mentorship and education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.